What's a parasite like you doing here? Get out right now or I'm calling the police. In the living room, where the firelight flickered softly, my biological sister, Charlotte Hayes, spat those words at me. In her hand was the luxury brand glass I had given her as a Christmas present last year. Inside it swirled a vintage wine that had been aging for years in my mountain lodge's cellar, a bottle worth several $1,000s. Her lips glistened sensually, stained with that expensive liquid. My name is Natalie Brooks, 38 years old. I built my real estate business from the ground up and succeeded, now living a life free from financial hardship. At work, I've always prided myself on making calm, realistic decisions. This place is my sanctuary, a haven I poured my heart and soul into creating. And today is Christmas Eve, the one day of the year I cherish the most. After finally securing a long overdue holiday, I plan to do nothing more than curl up under a blanket by the fire, sip hot cocoa, and let peace wash over me. My idea of pure luxury. But as I drove up the private road leading to my mountain lodge, a familiar car caught my eye. Parked in the guest space was Charlotte's white luxury SUV, the very one I was still paying off for her. Next to it sat another vehicle, a snow-covered sedan that had to belong to Liam's parents. An uneasy chill stirred in my chest. I had told no one about this trip. Sure, I had given Charlotte the code to the emergency key box beside the front door, but only for true emergencies. Never, in my worst imagination, did I think she'd barge in uninvited with her husband's entire family to throw a party in my home. Slowly, I stepped out of my car and placed my hand on the heavy oak door at the entrance. It wasn't locked. The moment I pushed it open, it wasn't just the warm air from the fireplace that brushed against my face. Loud music, bursts of laughter, and the heat of several bodies tangled in revelry hit me all at once. In the living room were Charlotte, her husband Liam, and, unmistakably, his parents and siblings. 7 people in total lounged about as if this were their house. The coffee table was a mess of turkey bones and empty champagne bottles. Only their ridiculous Christmas sweaters reminded me what night it was supposed to be. Their coats lay tossed over the sofa, but what truly froze me in place was the sight above the fireplace. The framed photo of my parents, one I had treasured for years, had been pushed aside. In its place stood a large, smiling family portrait of Liam's parents. This was no simple party. I felt it in my gut. The room reeked of something unmistakable, the scent of people actually living there. Yes, it was the warm, stale smell of a household that had been occupied for days. Even when I stepped inside, they didn't notice me at first. Then, Liam, slouched arrogantly on the sofa, pointed in my direction, and the music came to an abrupt stop. His mother stood up in surprise. "Oh, you must be Natalie. You've returned much earlier than Liam said you would. How was your trip?" At her words, I frowned. Trip? At that moment, Charlotte emerged from the kitchen, holding a wine glass in her hand. When she saw me, her face twisted with irritation. And then, with the smell of wine clinging to her breath, she hurled those opening words at me. Charlotte's face was flushed red, a mix of alcohol and the glow from the fireplace. Her outburst froze the air in the room. The ones most stunned were Liam's parents. "Charlotte, how could you say such a thing? To your sister, the one who so kindly lent you this mountain lodge." In that instant, everything clicked into place. Charlotte and Liam had told them I was away on a long business trip overseas and fabricated a story that I had generously lent them the house for the holidays. They had deceived not only me, but even Liam's own parents. "I don't recall lending it to anyone," I said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I didn't go on any trip. This is my house." "What did you just say?" Liam's father turned toward his son, demanding an explanation. Liam stood frozen, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. "Yes, this is my house." I took a slow breath, filling my lungs with the icy mountain air. My fingers, trembling with anger, pressed into the pockets of my coat as I forced my voice to stay calm. "The police? Go ahead. Call them, if you dare." For a brief moment, fear flickered in Charlotte's eyes, but she quickly covered it with a defiant smile and snatched her phone from the table. "Fine, if that's what you want. I'll tell the police that this woman's trying to ruin our Christmas party." As her trembling fingers dialed the number, the room fell into an unnatural silence. Liam's family exchanged uneasy glances, realizing at last that this was no ordinary argument. About 20 minutes later, through the window, I saw the flash of red and blue lights reflecting off the snow outside the cabin. When I answered the heavy knock at the door, 2 police officers stood there, both looking earnest and professional. Their eyes swept over the chaotic scene inside before settling on me and Charlotte with clear suspicion. "We got a report? What exactly is going on here?" one of them asked. Seizing the moment, Charlotte raised her shrill voice. "It's her! She barged in out of nowhere and ruined our vacation. She's a stalker!" "She's my sister," I interrupted, keeping my tone calm and steady. "And this is my house. They entered the property without my permission." The 2 officers exchanged puzzled looks. "That's a lie. This is our house," Charlotte screamed, her voice cracking. I sighed softly and opened the briefcase I always carried for work. From inside, I pulled out several documents: the deed proving ownership of the lodge, property tax receipts, and my identification. Without a word, I handed them to one of the officers. He examined each page carefully under the beam of his flashlight. "Those are fake. Obviously fake," Charlotte shrieked. But the officer's expression didn't change. After a moment, he looked up, handed the documents back to me, and turned a stern gaze toward Charlotte and Liam. "Ma'am, if these documents are legitimate, this property belongs to Natalie Brooks, this lady here. That means you and your family are staying here without her consent. Under Colorado law, this could constitute unlawful trespassing." At his words, the color drained from Charlotte's face. At the same time, Liam's mother collapsed weakly onto the floor. "Oh, my goodness. We were deceived by our own son and his wife. I'm so terribly sorry." She apologized sincerely to me, her voice trembling with guilt. I accepted her apology quietly, then spoke firmly, without hesitation. "Thank you for your words. However, whether you were deceived or not is no longer the issue for me. As a matter of fact, your family occupied my most private space without my permission. And above all, because you were here, I endured the worst humiliation of my life, being insulted by my own sister in my own home. For that reason alone, I can no longer keep you in this house." Liam flailed, stammering, "Well, we were having Christmas." "Because we're family, we should be allowed to use it," Charlotte shouted as a last-ditch protest. "We're blood-related sisters." At that, the office shook his head in genuine disbelief. "Unfortunately, family ties are not a get-out-of-jail-free card for trespassing. Miss Brooks, what would you like us to do?" "Do you want them removed?" All eyes stabbed into me. Charlotte's eyes were wet with anger and humiliation. I stared back at her steadily, and for a moment I thought of our mother, who had died several years ago. "Charlotte is still naive and dreamy. Please support her so she doesn't go astray." Those had been my mother's last words. To honor that promise, I had supported Charlotte and the others all this time. I swallowed her wasteful spending and Liam's failures. It wasn't weakness. It was a sister's sense of duty to protect the only family she had in this world. But I had reached my limit. I nodded quietly. "Yes, I want all of them to leave my house immediately." "Then please pack your things," one of the officers said after a nod. The living room filled with despairing sighs and small curses. Amid that, I calmly took out my smartphone and unlocked it with my fingerprint. The blue-white glow of the screen illuminated my composed face. The movement of Charlotte and the others, who had reluctantly begun packing their belongings at the officer's prompting, stopped dead. Every gaze in the room was fixed on the smartphone in my hand. The app I had opened was the high-security banking application I used for managing my assets. Without addressing anyone in particular, yet speaking clearly enough for everyone to hear, I began narrating my actions step by step. "First, Charlotte, the apartment you're living in. It's one of the properties I own. If rented at market price, it would be worth $2,500 a month. But I let you have it for the cost of maintenance alone. I did that because I believed it was my final responsibility as your sister. That privilege ends today." When I tapped the confirmation screen, a sterile digital chime echoed through the room. Charlotte dropped the Christmas ornament she had been holding. "You're joking, right?" Her voice trembled. Next, I turned my gaze directly toward Liam's parents, who sat hunched on the sofa. "And the comfortable apartment you're currently living in? Do you remember how you got it?" "I found that property myself, using my real estate expertise, without charging any commission, and I personally signed on as your guarantor so you could move in." I invested in that because I believed a stable home for you would eventually benefit your son. And this is the result. Liam's parents averted their eyes, unable to meet my gaze, weighed down by guilt. I looked back down at my screen. That's also why I provided the car. The SUV parked outside. Charlotte begged me through tears, saying it was necessary for her parents-in-law's hospital visits and grocery trips. So I covered the loan myself. And now you used that very car to break into my home and call me a parasite. What a perfect joke. This loan payment canceled. Tomorrow morning, I'll instruct the finance company to repossess it. Again, the merciless electronic sound rang out. No, that car. It's Charlotte's. Liam tried to say something, but the words got caught in his throat. His father could only stare at me in stunned silence. After completing every operation, I turned off the phone's screen. Then, for the first time, I met my sister's frozen eyes head-on. What I saw there wasn't anger. It was pure fear. The moment you called me a parasite, I made my decision. The total I've given you over the years easily exceeds $50,000. But from now on, I won't spend another cent on you. Charlotte's lips quivered as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Her arrogance was gone, replaced only by the cold terror of facing the reality that awaited her. Her husband, Liam, simply stared at the floor in silence. Liam's parents and siblings hurriedly gathered their belongings as if trying to flee from a disaster. They no longer made any attempt to defend Charlotte and Liam. From their slumped shoulders and hurried movements, it was clear they only wanted to escape this nightmare as quickly as possible. One of the officers gently tapped the shoulders of Charlotte and Liam, who still stood frozen in place. Come on, you two. The snow's getting heavier outside. If you don't move soon, the road will freeze over. The other officer turned a stern gaze toward Liam. I don't know how you all got here, but I assume someone's driving back down that snowy road. Is anyone sober? Because if every one of you's been drinking, you'll be spending tonight in jail for drunk driving instead of trespassing. At that, Liam's father awkwardly raised his hand. I haven't had anything to drink. I'll take responsibility for driving everyone home safely. The officer eyed him skeptically for a moment, then nodded. Good. Then get moving. At those words, Charlotte suddenly lurched forward, clinging to one last desperate hope, and tried to rush toward me. Natalie, please, think this through. It's Christmas. You can't just throw us out into the blizzard like this. Please. Before she could reach me, the officer caught her by the arm and stopped her. That's enough, ma'am. If you cause any more trouble, we'll have to take you in for obstruction of justice. That final warning broke her completely. Charlotte nearly collapsed, but Liam caught her just in time, holding her trembling body upright. They picked up their coats and bags from the wreckage of the party, the spilled drinks, torn decorations, and scattered plates, and, with their heads bowed like convicts, slowly made their way toward the door. Just before it closed, Charlotte turned around and glared at me with eyes full of hatred and pleading all at once. I met her gaze without a single change in expression. The heavy thud of the closing door echoed through the room, and at last, silence returned to my mountain lodge. The officers left after saying, "Sorry for the trouble, ma'am. Call us if anything else happens." I stood alone in the middle of the ruined living room. Only the fireplace continued to flicker softly, as if nothing had happened. Through the window, I watched the red and blue lights fade into the distance and exhaled a long, heavy breath. As the adrenaline drained away, my whole body began to feel heavy, like lead. I sank deep into the sofa and closed my eyes. Just a few hours ago, I had been looking forward to a peaceful Christmas holiday here. And now, that felt like a memory from another lifetime. The coffee table before me was littered with the remnants of their chaos. Dirty plates, half-empty glasses, and the pitiful bones of a picked-apart turkey. I picked up one of the glasses, the luxury brand one Charlotte had been using. It was the same glass I had given her for her birthday. As I stared at the faint red stain of wine left inside it, memories began to flood my mind. When our parents passed away within a few short years of each other, I was in my early 30s, struggling to build my career. Charlotte, still a student at the time, had lost the people she depended on most and became emotionally unstable. Seeing her like that, I told her, "From now on, I'll be your family." That promise eventually became a heavy chain around my neck. Even after graduating from college, Charlotte refused to find steady work. I wasn't born to sit in an office. I meant to live a more creative life. That was her constant refrain. After she married Liam, her attitude didn't change. Liam worked in sales, but his performance was poor, and his income alone couldn't support Charlotte's spending habits. So I began paying their rent. At first, it was supposed to be just until they got back on their feet. But somehow, that period stretched into 3 years. When Charlotte tearfully pleaded, "Liam's parents are getting older, and they have no way to get to the hospital or go shopping. Please, they need a car," I gave in again. In the end, I paid the down payment for the large SUV and even covered the monthly loan payments. It wasn't out of kindness. It was my way of preventing future excuses. An investment to avoid the day they would come to me again asking for money under the pretext of caregiving. I placed the glass back on the table and added new logs to the fireplace. The flames roared back to life, crackling and snapping softly in the quiet room. As I listened to the crackling of the fire, I found myself questioning everything. When had our relationship become so twisted? I had always believed I was acting out of my promise to our late mother, out of a sense of duty as an older sister. But perhaps, in the end, I was the one who turned Charlotte into someone incapable of standing on her own. She had always been clever in her own way. Whenever she wanted something, she used tears as her weapon, and whenever things went wrong, she found someone else to blame. Every time our parents gave in. And eventually, so did I. When she married Liam, I secretly hoped he would succeed where I had failed. I hoped he would be the one to keep her grounded. But that hope was shattered in the most foolish way imaginable. Liam was even weaker than Charlotte, a man who feared change and preferred comfort over confrontation. Rather than stop her spending, he benefited from it, using her indulgence to mask his own lack of success. In front of me, he always wore that same apologetic expression and said, "We're truly grateful for everything you've done, Natalie." But those words were never followed by action. Together, they leaned on me, feeding off my goodwill, a perfect example of parasitic coexistence. When Charlotte called me a parasite, it wasn't a drunken slip of the tongue. It was her truth, stripped of any pretense. There had never been a shred of gratitude in her heart, only entitlement and contempt for the one who provided. All this time, I had looked away from that reality. Maybe I was simply afraid of losing the last thread that tied me to family. But now, there was no turning back. What I severed that night wasn't just financial support. I cut away the illusion, the curse disguised as family. For a brief moment, I wondered how they were doing. Most likely, they had taken refuge at Liam's parents' house. But that wouldn't last long. Charlotte, with her self-centered nature, would never swallow her pride enough to live harmoniously under someone else's roof. What awaited them now was a long, harsh reality, one where they would have to stand on their own 2 feet. Every bill I had once covered would come crashing down on them all at once. Rent, the car loan, and most of all, Charlotte's pride. The pride of a woman who had grown addicted to luxury without ever earning it. Her world would begin to crumble quietly, starting tonight. And I would be here, in the silent mountain lodge, simply watching it happen from afar. When Christmas morning arrived, it was as if that chaotic night had never existed. The mountains were wrapped in perfect stillness and endless white. My phone remained turned off. For the first time in years, I was beginning a true holiday. One free from interruption, free from obligation. I spent the following week secluded in the cabin, wrapped in quiet. I read while gazing out at the snow, cooked elaborate meals just for myself, and watched films at night with a glass of wine in hand. I tried not to think about Charlotte and the others. No, that's not quite right. There was no need to think about them anymore. Their future was no longer my concern. When the holiday ended and I returned to my office in the city, reality was already waiting for me. As I skimmed through the stack of reports piled on my desk, the internal phone rang. It was a call from the property management company that handled my rental units. "Miss Brooks, this is about Charlotte Hayes and her husband. We still haven't received their rent payment for this month, and we haven't been able to contact them." I glanced at the calendar. The payment deadline had already passed by 5 days. "I see," I said evenly. "Please proceed with the standard protocol outlined in the lease agreement. Issue the payment demand and eviction notice as scheduled. No extensions, no exceptions." "I understand." The voice on the other end carried a hint of hesitation. He probably knew that I had been renting the apartment to my sister and her husband at a heavily discounted rate. But I said nothing more and ended the call. That afternoon, I received an email from the auto finance company. The subject line read, "Vehicle repossession completed." I opened the attached file to find a photo of the white SUV parked on a snowy roadside, hitched to a tow truck. I dragged the email straight to the trash and returned to work. There wasn't a single drop of emotion in me. The gears of their collapse had begun turning faster, and far more precisely than I had imagined. A few days later, on Friday night, I was relaxing in my apartment when my phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something in my chest stirred, and I pressed the answer button. "Hello?" "Natalie, it's me." A weak, strained voice came through the line. Charlotte's. It was the first time I had heard her voice since that night at the lodge. "What do you want?" My tone was cold. I could hear her inhale sharply on the other end. "How could you? That's cruel. You kicked us out, took the car. What are we supposed to do now?" Her voice grew more frantic with every word. "We're staying at Liam's parents' house, but it's unbearable. His mother throws insults at me every day, and Liam just blames me for everything." "You brought this on yourself," I said flatly. "You're facing the consequences of your own choices. It's not my concern." "It is your concern. You're the one who cut everything off. Don't you feel even a little responsible?" "Responsible? Don't make me laugh. I'm not your mother. You're 32 years old, Charlotte. Isn't it time you learned to take care of yourself?" That seemed to shatter what little pride she had left. "You don't understand," she screamed. "There's no way we can survive on Liam's salary alone. He's useless. He talks big, but he never gets promoted. He never provides." Then I heard it, a muffled male voice on the other end. "What did you just say?" It was Liam. Apparently, he'd been standing close enough to hear every word. "Wait," I heard Charlotte gasp. "But it's true. It's true because you burn through every dollar I make like water." Liam's shout was so loud it cut sharply through the line. "Whose fault do you think it is that we're living like this?" Their argument erupted in full force. Screaming, blaming, hurling accusations, the sound of two people tearing each other apart. I listened to their ugly fight without feeling a thing. Then, a loud crash echoed through the phone, something hitting the floor, and the call went dead. I quietly set my phone down on the table. The second movement of their collapse had begun. 2 more weeks passed after that call. Charlotte never reached out again. In the weeks following that stormy Christmas night, I remained in the mountain lodge, wrapped in peace and silence. My phone stayed off. The snow outside buried the noise of the city, and with it, every unpleasant memory. Meanwhile, their world was crumbling faster and more completely than I had expected. When I returned to the office after the holidays, the reports started coming in. Calm, factual, and relentless. The property manager wrote, "Eviction notice issued due to non-payment of rent." Charlotte was stripped of her lifestyle and scorned daily by her in-laws. And Liam finally has lost patience once my financial safety net, the illusion of stability, had vanished, leaving him face to face with his wife's extravagance and refusal to work. Rumor had it that Liam had officially filed for divorce. There was no alimony, no division of assets, because there was nothing left to divide. I merely watched it all unfold in silence. One day, as spring began to show its gentle face, I was at the lodge, which had long since regained its peace, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered. "Natalie?" The voice on the other end was thin, frail, unrecognizable. It was Charlotte. "I'm sorry, I was wrong about everything. Please, just give me one more chance. We're sisters, aren't we?" I looked out at the calm spring scenery before me and drew in a slow breath. "Charlotte, I'll give you one last piece of advice." "What?" "The next time you find yourself in trouble, don't call me. Call the police officers like you did that night. Who knows, maybe this time they'll take your side." That was the last thing I ever said to her. Before she could reply, I ended the call and added her number to my block list. There are no more parasites in my life. From now on, I will fully embrace the freedom I have earned, the quiet, the beauty, and the life that is finally completely mine.